Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political news and analysis show that I do. If you're new to the show, please subscribe. We are on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, as well as a few other smaller platforms. I'm very happy to say welcome to the first episode of the post-Biden era. I can imagine many of you are just as excited as I am that Biden's out of office. Believe it or not, I've only ever met one person who really liked Biden. And I don't mean would vote for Biden. I met plenty of people who were going to vote for Biden in 2024 and did vote for Biden in 2020. What I mean is people who liked Biden. If they could pick anybody, it would be Biden. I only met one person and she's dead now. So I think it is safe to say, other than Joe Biden, Jill, and Joe Biden himself, there's not a single American that wants Biden to stay in office. And he's gone. He was a very unpopular president. His approval rating was about 36% at the end. And I know we're all split about whether Trump is or will be a good president, but I think we can all unite on the issue that Biden is finally out. And I'm so happy about it. Speaking of Trump, I want to spend this episode talking about the actions that Trump has taken in his first 6-ish days in office. I'm recording this on Saturday night, so something might change between now and the publication of this episode, which I will cover in the next episode. Some of this stuff was predicted, as I did an episode about what I predicted that Trump would be doing in his first few days and weeks. Some of those things were not, though. The two big themes, along with some other stuff, it's going to be pardons and executive orders. I will also touch a bit on foreign policy, particularly the war in Ukraine. Firstly, with pardons, Trump made an enormously controversial move to pardon or commute the sentences of almost all of the January 6th rioters. Maybe all of them, I'm not entirely sure. There was over 1,500 of them. And even the leaders of these movements, such as the leaders of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, some of them were very violent, the leaders and the people involved. Most of them were pardoned. Maybe all of them, I do not know. Some of them I think were probably treated too harshly. It may not shock you that I'm not a big fan of this decision, but as I said, some of them were treated too harshly, unlike the BLM protesters in the summer of 2020. But many of them deserve the charges that they got, the January 6ers. Did they deserve the sentences that they got? Probably not. I do have to agree that many of them had harsher sentences than usual ones, which led to the claims that they were political prisoners. But my answer isn't to lessen their sentences, it's to increase everyone else's. If you're going to trespass on federal property, then you need to be punished for that. Now, I think there's a difference between the people who led the movement and the people who kind of got caught up in the mob, but that really should be treated on a case-by-case basis. For example, if somebody attacked a police station during the summer of the George Floyd protests, which I can't believe was almost 5 years ago, they likely got a very low sentence. In fact, somebody even set fire to a police building, and we haven't even a police precinct. And as far as I know, I haven't heard really anything about it. That person probably had a very low sentence compared to somebody who attacked the Capitol or even just walked in the Capitol. I also think, as I said, I think there's a mob mentality, which many people in the crowd were swept into it. One question I do have about these pardons that I don't think we're ever going to get an answer to is why weren't they issued prior to Trump leaving office 4 years ago? Biden has shown with the pardons of his family and certain individuals, which, by the way, if you did not hear, minutes before he left office, he pardoned his family members, preemptive pardon, supposedly to protect himself from Trump. But Biden also once said, I'm not going to play the clip, but Biden also once said that he would not issue any preemptive pardons. But anyway, Trump could have used the time, the 2 weeks that passed between the attack and Biden coming into office 4 years ago, to pardon those people, to issue preemptive pardons. And at that time, many people were going to be charged or were charged. One potential answer that I came up with is that it was too fresh in the minds of people at that time. Pardoning them right away may have just hurt his chances in the coming impeachment trial, which was held in February of 2021. Now that it's been 4 years, which is like 10 years in politics, people have mostly moved on. Just a theory of mine. Anyway, Trump issued huge executive orders, and I know I'm going to miss some of them, and I apologize. But firstly, for amateurs out there, I want to explain what an executive order is, just briefly. An executive order is a quote-unquote law that is signed by the president that has the full force of law, but is limited to managing the operation of the federal government. It comes from Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1 of the Constitution, which allows the president to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. So simply put, the framers intended executive orders to be an extension of congressional laws that simply just enforces them. What Trump has signed goes well beyond that, and frankly, most presidents also do that as well. One famous example was, it was either in 2013 or 2012, I don't remember, that established the DACA program and the Dreamers. Obama basically unilaterally allowed illegal immigrants who were brought here as children to stay here as long as they followed certain rules and reapplied. It was absolutely not legal, and the court ruled so, but since the status had been handed out, the court also ruled that those Dreamers, as they became called, using the DACA program, could remain in it, but no new applicants could be accepted. And those people are still in limbo. All they can do is renew. Congress needs to act on that. And if I was Trump, that's something that I would focus on. But let me just insert in here, Trump and the Republicans don't have an incentive to solve the immigration problem, because once it's solved, they can't campaign on it anymore. And the reverse is true with abortion for the Democrats. If the Democrats are ever in an opportunity to codify abortion rights, if I was a Democratic strategist, I would say don't do it. And the reason I would say don't do it is because then you can't campaign on it. So really, Democrats should be looking at illegal immigration and saying, oh, we need to fix this so that it can't be used against us. And Republicans should be saying the same thing about abortion. Oh, this could be used against us, so we should fix this. Anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down into that. What are Trump's executive orders? Well, he declared an emergency at the U.S.-Mexico border and vowed to deploy troops to the region, and I believe he has, including the National Guard. This is basically just a proclamation, so this would be legal. The troop part, especially the National Guard, could get dicey, but many red states might be willing to hand over their National Guards, and if you don't know, National Guards are at the control of governors. He also designated certain cartels as terrorists, and that is also likely legal. He used an act passed in 1798 to target them. I believe it was the Alien and Sedition Act. So once again, this is an extension from Congress's action, and that law was never repealed. Suspending the U.S. refugee admissions program settlements, this could be a bit dicey. Since he suspended it temporarily, just for 90 days, this could be allowed, but a permanent suspension might not be allowed. There were also Afghans that were cleared to resettle in America, and that program has been canceled, and that's likely legal, as sad as that might be. Termination of all parole programs that are contrary to policies of the U.S. established in executive orders, that's something else he did. I'm not exactly sure what that means. That is also probably legal, as long as it doesn't conflict with Congress or create a new law. Basically, executive orders can help enforce and interpret laws passed by Congress, but they can't contradict. Remain in Mexico has also been established. This should have never been removed. This basically is just that people must wait in Mexico while their asylum claims are being heard. The old Biden app, Biden set up an app where migrants could book appointments for screenings to come into the country. That has been canceled. That was canceled pretty much an hour after Trump took office. Trump has also empowered officials to, quote, repel, repatriate, or remove any alien engaged in the invasion, unquote, of the southern border. Also legal. This is also legal since it is enforcing existing law. And I've been saying this for a long time. Biden did not need a new law passed by Congress to repel the invasion, quote-unquote, invasion from the southern border, because crossing into this country is already illegal. His bold move, most bold move, was to end birthright citizenship. This is absolutely not allowed, and it has already been suspended by the court because this is a violation of the constitutional amendment passed in the 1800s. Trump originally ordered, after 30 days of the passage of this amendment, not to recognize babies born in the U.S. if neither of their parents were a citizen or a lawful permanent resident. While not constitutional, I think this is a fair choice. If somebody is just born in America without any connection to here, they should not be allowed to have citizenship. They can get citizenship just like, people who were born somewhere else, but if just because you were born on U.S. soil should not mean that you are a U.S. citizen. It should be that either your parents are a citizen, one of your parents, or it should be that one of your parents is legally allowed to be here. As for energy, Trump has removed us from the Paris Climate Accord and declared a national energy emergency. Since we entered the Paris Climate Accord under Obama in 2015, it is without congressional approval. It is not a treaty and therefore is just executive fiat. Leaving the Paris Climate Accord is legal, and frankly, we weren't really going to meet the obligations anyway. It does take a full year to officially leave the accord, so we will not be out until January 2026 officially, but truthfully, we weren't meeting the agreement goals anyway, so it doesn't really matter, and now that we're leaving, it doesn't really matter if we don't meet those deadlines. The pausing of leases for offshore wind, which I think is kind of stupid, that is also legal. Restarting energy production in certain areas of coastal Alaska are also legal. Now, let me just throw in there, Patrick DeHaan of Gas Buddy did say on his podcast, I highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in energy. It's called Over a Barrel. He was saying that at the end of the Trump administration in 2021, he opened up remote areas of Alaska for drilling. And for about a week or two, the companies were able to make bids. No company made any bids because no company wants to drill out in the middle of nowhere where they have to build temporary housing, they have to build pipelines, they have to see if there's even oil there to begin with. So really, this is not going to do much. And really, as I will explain later, we don't have a nationalized oil industry in this country, so Trump can't just tell oil companies to increase production. They're only going to do it if it makes sense for them. As I've said before, Trump can yell, drill, baby, drill. But this isn't really that really isn't going to do much. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The only thing that oil companies that are going to make them want to drill is high oil prices. And oil prices are a little bit higher than they used to be, but they're not that much higher. And considering adjusted for inflation, oil prices are actually lower than they were when Trump was in office 4.5 years ago. Well, actually, 4.5 years ago, we were during COVID. So I would say like five years ago. Culturally, on the culture side, it is official. The U.S. government now only recognizes two sexes, which is true. That has always been the case. There's only two sexes, male and female, and that cannot be changed under any circumstance according to the executive order. He also rescinded the ability of trans people to serve in the military. Also not a surprise. I totally agree with that. Trans people should not be allowed to serve in the military for the simple reason is they have huge health issues, particularly mental health and physical health. Not to get gross here, but if a man is serving in a transgender woman is serving in the military and they have a surgery down there, they need to dilate in order to keep it open, and that needs to be done every week. Imagine if you're in the battlefield and you need to dilate your, Anyway, he also ordered an investigation into, quote, up to 9 publicly traded corporations, large nonprofits, foundations, and with assets of over $500 million, state and local bar and medical association, and higher education institutions with $1 billion endowments to remove the DEI programs, to investigate them if they're legal. He's basically going after non-governmental organizations that have DEI programs because all government DEI programs are now being dismantled within 60 days and their employees are currently on paid leave. Is this legal? Well, the government part, yes. If it's nonprofit that receives tax-exempt status, they might be able to because they might be able to indirectly force them because they could threaten to remove the tax exemption status. But in terms of private companies, that's not going to happen. And higher institutions, no, unless you're going to threaten their federal tax dollars. Same with any other entity that receives federal money. Trump could say, if you want to keep getting federal money, then you need to do this. Really, you need to do this, and this. Really, you need to listen to. It really needs to be done through an act of Congress, which should be relatively easy if you can stick that in there. Removing DEI programs simply could just be made as a requirement for receiving tax breaks and federal grants. For federal workers, he ordered all federal workers back to work, which doesn't really make sense to me since money could be saved if they work from home. You can sell the office space. Anyway, he implemented a hiring freeze for non-military and non-essential personnel. He also reinstated Schedule F, which was in his first term, which made the firing of civil servants easier if they are politically disobedient. Speaking of civil servants, he just fired about 12 of them in different agencies. I don't know much about that. The more information is going to come. If I think it's important, I will I will bring that up in the next episode. But for now, I do have to admit this part does concern me, considering we do have a law against this, the Pendleton Civil Service Act of the 1800s, that was supposed to prevent messing with the civil service. If it's not challenged, then if it's not challenged soon, I don't think it ever will be. But I would, if I was the people fired, I would definitely challenge this, because I don't think this executive order is entirely legal. This is more miscellaneous. This is kind of the rest of what I pulled out of here. We're also pulling out of the World Health Organization, but Trump at his rally in Las Vegas said we could go back into the World Health Organization if China starts paying more, which is weird. It's like, all right, so China's going to pay even more into the World Health Organization, but we want them to have less influence. Okay. The order to lower prescription drugs signed by President Biden has also been rescinded. He also redesignated Houthi rebels in Yemen who have been attacking our ships as terrorist organizations. Yep, that's legal. He also ensured that government agencies don't attack the rights of free speech of Americans. That's a proclamation symbolic. He also revoked the clearances of officials who signed a letter discrediting the Hunter Biden laptop story, which we don't have enough time to get into. He established Doge, suspended the TikTok ban for 75 out of the maximum of 90 days, renamed Mount Denali to Mount McKinley, and of course one of my favorite is renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And I like that idea, the Gulf of America. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff. He's been very busy, and he will only be more busy. As for the political side of this, different polls have said different things, but the story seems to be that Americans are mostly positive about Trump, meaning his approval rating is higher than his disapproval rating. This is a huge change from a couple of years ago where he was underwater almost his entire presidency. According to Real Clear Politics, who have a handful of polls so far, one of them is, I consider them to be garbage, has a Trump approval rating. Three of them here is 56, 56, and 47. The disapproval rating is 40, 41, and 39. For context, Biden started at around 55%, so I imagine that Trump is hovering in the low 50s, which is not a great place to be a brand new president, but he's also not brand new, so it's not that hard, so it's kind of hard to compare. I expect that Trump's approval rating will drop over the coming months and will be negative by mid to late summer at the earliest, or at the latest. However, Trump has a lot of political capital for the time being, which means that most of the stuff that he wants to get done via Congress needs to be put into motion this year. That means tax cuts, overhauling the federal government, etc., etc. So Congress is going to be very busy, and in fact, they have been. The Senate has confirmed Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, John Ratcliffe as CIA Director, Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary, and Kristi Noem was confirmed as Homeland Security Secretary. It also appears that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, will be confirmed today as well. Congress has also passed the Laken Riley Act, and that will be the first act that Trump signs into law, which requires the reporting of ICE to ICE of illegal immigrants that commit low-level crimes. Great law, in my opinion. There are also other officials that will need confirmation in the coming months, like RFK Jr. and some other people as well. He just comes to mind, Tulsi Gabbard and others. However, with the 53-47 majority in the Senate, that shouldn't necessarily be a problem. Even Pete Hegseth, the most controversial nominee, was confirmed 50-50 with J.D. Vance as the tie-breaking vote. So what comes next? Well, keep an eye out on what Congress decides to act on first. It seems to me that they want to lump all of Trump's agenda into one bill. Leaders are split on the issue, though, and this is going to be very tough because as of now, Republicans only have that hold the House 218 to 215, and one more Republican is expected to resign in the coming weeks to join the Trump administration. And that means they can't afford to lose any more votes if all the Democrats are present, and believe me, they are going to be present. They seem to, the Republicans, want to focus on illegal immigration, tax cuts, and boosting domestic oil and gas production. If you ask me, it's a good place to begin. If I was a Republican strategist, which I'm not, and if I was, I'd be fired pretty quickly. Since there are 2- and 4-year terms in this country, the idea is to establish the big stuff at the beginning and then do the quick and easy stuff at the end. What I mean is, the stuff that takes more time for people to notice, such as oil production, that needs many years. So the idea is to establish the hard, big stuff first while your political capital is the highest. And then once you're a few months away from the election, start with the easy stuff that can win over voters. people will need more time to feel better off economically. So starting with tax cuts, even if you think are a bad policy, is just a good idea. Don't forget that they also need to pass the government funding bill and raise the debt ceiling. The funding bill needs to be passed by March, and the debt ceiling bill needs to be passed by June. If I was in charge, I'd say tie those two things together, and if Democrats try to take it down, they can be accused of messing with the nation's credit, as Democrats so often do with Republicans. As for domestic policy, I want to talk about tariffs. I know we're going to run over. I don't have the time or the expertise to get into all of this, but I know this. Tariffs will hurt both the U.S. and Canada as well as Mexico, and Trump has said they will begin on or around February 1st, which is Saturday. I believe Trump's using this as a negotiation tactic to get some concessions, which is smart, but this needs to be handled very carefully. As my friend Dylan says, tariffs are a precision tool, and Trump is threatening to use them like a sledgehammer. According to the Peterson Institute of International Economics, they published a report 3 days before he took office. The U.S. economy would shrink about 2%, but the Canadian economy would shrink by over 5%, and the Mexican economy would shrink by 6 to 7%. So tariffs would definitely hurt Canada and Mexico more, which makes sense because our economy is larger, but don't get me wrong, it would be very, very costly for us Americans. Just a quick example, if an item costs a manufacturer $1 to make and they sell it for $1.50, that's a 50% profit margin, a 25% tariff would be placed on the manufacturer. And in order to maintain that 50% profit margin, that price would have to go up to $1.88, which is a hike of over 25%. That's almost 30%. And then that would be across the board, so that would be almost everything that we consume. Anyway, this is not a good thing, and that's why I don't think Trump is going to impose them. As for foreign policy, which is not my focus as a political science student, but it's still important because that has impacts here at home, Trump spoke on Thursday at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He spoke virtually. These people, they meet every year. I like to call them the Davos elite because they're like the rich people that do, they're like, oh, well, they kind of look down on the rest of us. Trump spoke virtually and demanded that OPEC increase oil production to lower the price of oil and cripple the Russian economy so that the war will come to an end. I think this is a very smart move from Trump, something Biden would have never done. He was just too against it, I could just tell, because Biden is very anti-oil. I've always thought that climate activists, they get it very wrong when they try to limit oil production, because that only raises oil prices higher, and higher oil prices give more incentive to increase oil production. Instead, increasing oil production will lower prices and therefore weaken the profits of oil companies. So if anything, if you're a climate activist, you want more oil to be pumped. More and more and more, so the price goes down. So Trump can't unanimously raise oil production, as I've said earlier, but Saudi Arabia can, and he has a good relationship with the Saudi leader, Mohammed bin Salman. Russia has very little access to credit now, so without their war machine, which is the oil industry, they will be forced to sue for peace if we can push oil prices down a little bit lower. Russia's economy is already facing huge budget deficits, high interest rates, high spending, and high inflation. So lower revenue for the government should be the thing that pushes it over the edge. And it seems to me that is the reason sanctions have not been nearly as effective as they were predicted to be 3 years ago. Well, Trump was not able to end the war within 28 hours, as he promised to do. This good relationship, compared to Biden's hostile one, could potentially work, but without getting too much into it, there needs to be something in for Saudi Arabia. They're also running budget deficits, so they're not just going to increase production for no reason. If Trump's able to increase global oil production, that would not only end the war, but bring down inflation here at home, because energy prices will be cheaper than it is now. As of right now, the national average for a gallon of gasoline is about $3.10, and oil prices are around $78 a barrel, and for U.S. oil, it's about $75. If you're a Democrat, what's the good news for you? Because I've been talking about all the news that Republicans are probably like, oh great, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. It probably sounds pretty bleak, but I do have some good news for you too. It's not nearly as much, but it's still, I try to be as fair as possible. First, executive orders can be overturned very easily, at least on paper. Some of these impacts are going to be permanent, like the deportations. It's not like once they're deported, we're going to bring them back, unless they make their way back. But Some of these orders can be overturned, and as they say, elections have consequences. And let me just say, Democrats do really need to face the consequences of what Americans, including myself, perceive as 4 years of failure. Anyway, unless Congress overturns it, Biden's laws that he signs, particularly the ones when Democrats were in full control of the government for 2 years, are safe, because the narrow majorities Trump has is going to make it difficult to overturn them. Lastly, presidents usually become even more unpopular and weaker as their term goes on. There's an old saying, it's so old that it's even in the Bible. It's saying that familiarity breeds contempt. Basically, it's that people that know you for a long time will begin to lose respect for you. It is something that I am very vulnerable to as a person, both politically and, in my everyday life. So it probably explains why I am such a hater. It applies to politics as well, and I think it really does, even more so than in our lives. And so my prediction is that people will turn on Trump. My guess is it's not going to be a huge sweep where an incident occurs and his approval rating drops like 10%. Of course, I think it's going to be a slow decline where bit by bit people will turn on him. Of course, there's always that base of support, so it's never going to drop really low, but you can't win the midterms with just a base of support, especially if the Democrats are able to bring over independents and turn out their base. Lastly, Democrats are I know I said lastly before, but really lastly, Democrats are likely to retake the House and gain a Senate seat or two in the midterms, which means their path out of the wilderness is vulnerable. They just need to be visible. They just need to be ready to take advantage of it. I'm fairly confident in saying that unless we have a national crisis, Trump is at the strongest he will ever be, and this is the downhill from here. It's downhill. Anyway, I approve of Trump for now. There are some questionable things, but I'm mostly happy with where we are at. However, as one of my friends joked, by the middle of this year, I'll be pissed once again. I'm just hard to impress. Thank you for listening, and I will be sure to see you next week. Thank you, and goodbye.